What exactly makes following a low-carb eating plan so effective when nothing else you've ever tried has seemed to work? Is it really possible to lose weight without counting calories or without restricting how much you eat or without feeling hungry and miserable all the time? You've probably figured out by now that here at Thinlicious, we're pretty passionate about ditching the carbs. But what you might not totally understand just yet is why, or what that actually means. And that's why in today's episode, we're going to get super granular and talk about macros and the power of actually counting your carbs, how it works, why it works, and a few pitfalls that can really derail your progress, especially as you're just getting started, but also even if you've been doing this for a while and you're noticing that you've hit a plateau. As always, there's a lot to get through, so let's dive in. Welcome to the Ditch the Carbs podcast, brought to you by Thinlicious. I'm your host, Ruth Soukup, and here we'll talk about everything from the science of weight loss and metabolic flexibility to practical tips for making your health a priority in the midst of a very busy life. It's the perfect blend of insightful education, practical application, and good old-fashioned motivation. So buckle up, friend, because it's about to get real. Hey there, and welcome back to the Ditch the Carbs podcast. Once again, my name is Ruth Soukup, and I am the founder of Thinlicious and the Thin Adapted System, as well as the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books. I'm also a 40-something-year-old woman who knows exactly what it's like to struggle with your weight and with eating well and with getting healthy. And if this is your first time listening to this podcast, then you might want to go back and listen to that episode. It's called The Simple Changes I Made to Lose 40 Pounds and Actually Keep It Off. And then you'll have a better idea of how my own journey has inspired me to help other women lose weight and get healthy through our Thinlicious program. And if you're brand new to Thinlicious, then you should also know that we are just kicking off a brand new 4-week challenge today called the Healthy Belly Challenge, which is based on our 28-day Metabolism Reset Starter program and specifically focused on healing your gut and improving your core strength. And guys, this month is going to be so much fun. It is definitely not too late to join the challenge and to get in on all the action. And I'm telling you, it really is the perfect way to get started with our program. So I strongly encourage you to go and check that out and get signed up if you haven't already. You can get all the details about the challenge and sign up at thinlicious.com/challenge. Once again, that URL is thinlicious.com/challenge. But today, the topic that I want to dive into is really just getting into the basics of what actually makes our program so effective for so many women. Really the foundation of what our program is all about, which is obviously about limiting your carb intake, but also about replacing those carbohydrates that used to form the bulk of your diet with the right balance of protein and healthy fat. And while that sounds simple, and in theory it is simple, there are actually a lot of ways that people go totally wrong with low-carb diets and ketogenic diets because they don't actually totally understand what it is they're trying to accomplish. But hopefully after today, it will all make a lot more sense. And so whether you are just thinking about making the switch to a low-carb lifestyle, you're just dabbling in and listening to this podcast to see if this is maybe something in the future you would maybe consider wanting to do, or whether you've been eating this way for a while, there will probably be a lot of golden nuggets and a lot of aha moments that you can take away from today's discussion. So first things first, let's just spend a few minutes talking about macros, what they are and why they actually matter when it comes to weight loss. So macros, as you might already know, or maybe you've heard at some point, is short for a word called macronutrients. And that just simply means the nutrients that your body needs in larger amounts versus micronutrients, things like vitamins and minerals, which your body needs in very small amounts. And so the 3 macronutrients that we usually talk about are proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, right? I'm sure you've heard of all three of those things. Those are the macronutrients, the things that your body needs in large quantities versus micro quantities. So macronutrients are typically considered essential nutrients because your body can't make them and your body can't produce enough of them on your own. And so they contain the components of food that your body really needs to maintain its systems and structures. You have to be getting those macronutrients. There's things like vitamin deficiencies that happen when you might not be getting all of your micronutrients, but on a daily and weekly basis, you can fudge a little on the micronutrients, but you really do need the macronutrients because they also provide all of the energy that your body needs in the form of calories. And each of these three macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, and fat, they do different things for your body. They serve different functions. So proteins are often referred to as the building blocks of life because they help to create and maintain muscle mass, while carbohydrates are generally the thing that's providing your body with its primary source of energy, at least in a typical high carbohydrate diet. We're going to talk about that in a second. And then fats are really important because they provide essential fatty acids and they also help to regulate your hormones. And that is really huge because fat often gets such a bad rap, right? People are so afraid of fat, but it really is the thing of all of these that keeps your body functioning well, especially as we age and our hormones start to change. Most people need more healthy fats in their life. I'm just going to say that. And so what's really important to understand is that even though carbohydrates are providing your body with its primary source of energy most of the time when you're eating a high carbohydrate diet, your body can actually use other macronutrients for energy if needed, which really kind of makes carbohydrates a non-essential nutrient if you think about it. But the other nutrients, fats and proteins, are actually essential because carbohydrates can't turn into fat and protein, but protein and fat can turn into carbohydrates or they can turn into energy. Does that make sense? So you're with me, right? We need to have a balance of all three, but the two that are really, really important is the fat and the proteins because we can get the energy source from the fat and the protein as well. But when it comes to weight loss and getting healthy, all three of these macronutrients really do play a vital role because if any one of them is out of balance or out of whack or lacking in your diet, especially when it comes to protein and fat, then it has a huge impact on your blood sugar and on your metabolism and on your overall energy levels. And so there is no one size fits all approach when it comes to macro ratios. I just want to say that, right? Every body is different. And so while there is no one size fits all approach, here at Thinlicious, we strongly recommend that anyone looking to lose weight and to get healthy really try to focus your efforts on limiting your carbohydrate intake because carbohydrates are what cause the biggest spikes in insulin. And that will also lead to fat storage. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're getting lots of protein, lots of healthy fats. And honestly, even though this idea of cutting out carbs and going keto has been a pretty popular diet trend for a while now, right? People have been talking about this for a while. This isn't like super new. But for a lot of people, this still feels counterintuitive, right? Most of us grew up in the 80s and 90s during that like fat-free craze where we were basically told over and over and over again that fat is bad and the only way to lose weight is to severely restrict your calories and to eat skinless chicken over a bed of lettuce with fat-free dressing. Gross. No wonder we were so miserable. But the reality is that your calorie count really isn't the thing that makes a difference when it comes to weight loss. I think that's really hard for a lot of us to soak in, especially for women. Like we just can't get over the fact that calories don't matter. But think about it. On a daily basis, even if you were completely sedentary, even if you laid in bed all day long, your body requires a huge amount of calories just to function, right? Your brain needs a huge number of calories, your heart, your lungs, all your internal organs, just to pump your blood around 24 hours a day, all of that requires so many calories, way more calories than we ever consume. Our body's burning those calories. Our body's consuming those calories. And so even though we're told over and over and over again, and we've been told this for years and years and years, that weight loss and weight gain is just a matter of calories in and calories out, how much you take in and how much you take out. You got to burn more than you take in. It doesn't actually work that way. And if you think about how many calories our bodies are burning on a daily basis, it makes sense that that doesn't make sense, right? Because even though doctors and experts have been telling us that, the truth is that our bodies don't work that way. And they are consuming so many more calories than we are actually consuming. So, but then it begs the question, right? Why do we gain weight and have so much trouble shedding excess pounds if our bodies are just burning all these calories all the time? Why does it feel like our metabolism is broken? And why does it feel like losing weight is impossible? Even when we're eating those foods that everyone says are healthy, right? Where you're like eating fruit and yogurt and granola and oatmeal and whole grains. Well, think about it. It's usually because those foods are high in carbohydrates. And so if those foods that we're eating, even these so-called healthy foods like quinoa, we're still filling our diet with those things. And for most of us, if you're not tracking your macros, but you just kind of eat normally, most people's diets are like 70% carbohydrates, right? We're eating, and a lot of people are like 90%. We're eating a huge number of carbohydrates that makes up almost all of our macronutrients. And so if our diet is high in carbohydrates, then we're still spiking our insulin levels, which is in turn telling our body to store fat, right? When your insulin is high, your hormones tell your body to store fat. You got to hang on to it. You got to cling to it. And so even though you think you're eating healthy, you're actually becoming this fat storage machine. Because the single biggest factor in being able to successfully lose weight and keep it off is being able to stabilize your insulin levels. Again, when your insulin is high, your body stores fat. And again, the standard American diet is just packed with high carbohydrate foods, which basically keeps all of us in this constant state of elevated insulin levels or insulin resistance. And typically, because you're eating more carbohydrates than your body can use for energy, it turns all of those excess carbohydrates into fat and then tells your body to store all that fat. So every time you eat, again, you're turning into a fat storage machine without even realizing it. And on the flip side, when you switch to a low carb diet and dramatically reduce the number of carbohydrates that you're eating, your body's forced to dip into those fat reserves and to start to burn fat for fuel rather than carbs. Because remember what I said a minute ago, your body needs fat and it needs protein, but it doesn't actually need carbohydrates because it can get fuel for energy from the fat and the protein that you are consuming. And this process of switching the way that your body burns fuel from burning carbohydrates as its primary energy source to burning fat is what we at Thinlicious call being thin adapted. And honestly, it's amazing. Being thin adapted is like the best thing on the planet because once you're fully thin adapted, your body basically has an endless source of energy from the fat reserves in your body. And you feel it. You feel that endless source of energy. All of a sudden, you're not hungry all the time. You have tons of energy. You're like raring to go. And it is amazing. So that is basically the goal when you're getting started with a low carb diet plan, to help your body make this switch from relying on carbohydrates to burning fat all the time. And again, it's not about counting calories or about restricting what you eat. You don't have to be hungry. You can basically eat as much as you want or as much as you need to feel satisfied, but it has to be the right foods in the right balance. So what exactly is the right balance? Well, at Thinlicious, we have several different macro recommendations depending on what phase of our program you are in. So if you're in phase 1, which is what we call the acclimate phase, you want to make sure that your carb count is under 25 total grams of carbohydrates per day, and that your carbs ideally make up no more than 10% of your total macros, but ideally closer to 5% of your total macros, your total percent of macros from calories. So that's pretty low, right? That's real low. And at the same time, you want to make sure that you're getting lots of healthy fat. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. In phase one, 70 to 80% of your calories, of your total calories, should be coming from healthy fats. Things like avocado oil and coconut oil and extra virgin olive oil and butter and full fat dairy and even fatty cuts of meat. And then the rest of what you're eating there, 15 to 25% of your macros should be proteins. And honestly, this can be pretty hard for people when you're just getting started. This is typically what throws people off, because especially if you've always tried to stay away from fat, or you're just used to eating a diet that was 80 to 90% carbohydrates, which is pretty typical for most Americans, this is a big shift. And this is why tracking your macros, especially in the beginning, is really, really important, because you might think you're changing the way that you eat, but then you actually keep track of it and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not even close. So let's talk about that for a minute, starting with what it actually means to track your macros. Now, there are a lot of different ways to do this, but the easiest way, especially in this day and age, is to use some sort of food tracker app that will help calculate your macros and give you a percentage breakdown. You can also do it by hand, but guys, you're going to end up having to do a lot of math. It's really not worth the effort when there are apps that will make it so much easier. And honestly, I sincerely hope that someday in the future, we are going to have a Thinlicious app that is specifically designed for our program and for our recommendations. And I have all these ideas for it. And I promise you, it's on the list of things that we want to do. But for now, the two apps that we typically recommend to try are either the Lose It app or MyFitnessPal. And I'm going to just tell you right now, neither are perfect, especially exactly for our program, but both will work, and they will both give you the numbers that you're looking for, which is your total number of carbohydrates along with your macro ratio breakdown, essentially how much of your total calories are coming from carbohydrates and fats and proteins. And while we're not actually all that concerned about that total calorie number, it is something that you'll be able to see, right? It's something that you'll still be able to look at, because it's impossible to count your macros without also knowing your calorie number. So the thing is, in order to make this work, you do need to actually input all of the food that you are eating throughout the day into the app. And honestly, that is probably the worst part, right? It can feel a little bit tedious. I have always used the Lose It app, and I really do like that it saves all of your previous meals. So if you're the kind of person that eats a lot of the same things over and over and again, you don't have to keep re-entering everything. And that's nice, and that does make it a little bit easier. But it's still a bit of a pain because you got to do it every single day for every single meal. But that said, tracking your macros really is one of the most important things that you can ever do if you want to get really good results on a low-carb diet plan like Thinlicious, because it gives you the ability to see exactly what's working and what's not working in terms of your macros. And so if you're finding that you're still hungry all the time, or that your energy levels are really low, then you can look at your macro breakdown and start to adjust things accordingly. Maybe you need a little bit more fat. Maybe you need fewer carbs. Maybe you need to eat a little bit more protein. But you won't know that unless you're paying attention to it. And so having those numbers in front of you is going to make it so much easier to make the changes that you need to in order to get the best results possible. And honestly, I think one of the things our coaches in our program are really good at too is talking about that and helping people make those adjustments, but they can't help you unless you're actually keeping track of what you're eating. Because a lot of times when people tell me that something's not working and they're not losing weight or they're not seeing results, it's because they aren't actually tracking at all. And it turns out that their ratios were like completely off, right? They thought they were eating one way, but it turns out that they were totally eating a different way. So with that in mind, what should you actually be looking at when it comes to food labels and those numbers that you have to be paying attention to? What is the difference between net carbs and total carbs, and which of those do you need to actually be worried about? Well, the very first thing that you'll want to pay attention to is the serving size. Because if you don't know the serving size, then that's a problem. But that's going to be the number that all of the nutrition facts are referring to. So if you eat double what the serving size says, then you're going to have twice as many carbs and twice as much fat and protein, right? So always make sure to pay attention to that, to the serving size. And then for carbohydrates, you want to look at both total carbs and net carbs. Total carbs refers to the total amount of carbohydrates in a given food item per serving size, including things like fiber and allulose and sugar alcohols. Net carbs, on the other hand, is simply total carbs minus fiber, minus sugar alcohols, and minus the allulose. And the reason why those get subtracted out is because those don't actually get digested by your body. So they don't typically have an impact on your blood sugar levels or your macros, typically. Now, there are exceptions. We're not going to get into that today. We talk all about that in our program. But for the most part, that's kind of how it works. And for most of the foods that you're eating, especially all of your natural whole foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and whole grains, as well as for the foods that you're cooking from scratch, you'll generally want to focus on counting your net carbs rather than your total carbs. But it is a good idea to be a little bit more careful if you're eating a lot of processed foods and a lot of packaged food items like bars and shakes that say they're keto friendly, especially when they're produced by these big multinational food companies that are just trying to jump on the keto bandwagon. I'll try to avoid a big tangent on this, but the reality is that there's a lot of non-scrupulous multi-billion-dollar companies that are trying to game the system by packing their high-carb foods with artificial fiber in order to have a lower net carb count. And so try not to be like overly crazy about the whole thing. You just have to kind of consider the source, right? If it's a gigantic company and all of their food is this sugar-laden, chemical, highly processed crap, and just stay away from it. Chances are their so-called keto stuff is not going to be great for you. If it's a small company, if it's a company that actually cares about the ingredients that they're putting into your food, but it's still a packaged keto thing, it's probably going to be a lot better. And honestly, a few processed items here and there, especially for the sake of the convenience or a special treat, they're not going to be a big deal. And so those things can absolutely be part of a healthy low-carb lifestyle, but as a general rule, try to focus on filling your diet with as many whole foods as possible. The less processed, the better, for so many reasons that we probably don't have time to get into today, but that probably would be a great topic for a future episode. Of course, carbohydrates aren't the only thing that you're going to want to look at on your food labels. Protein and fats are also really important, although they don't usually get as much attention. But remember, success with a low-carb eating plan really isn't just about keeping your carbs under a certain number. It's also about hitting the optimal balance of carbs to fat to protein. So if you're someone who's trying to lose weight on a low carb plan, then you're going to want to make sure that your protein intake is adequate in order to keep your metabolism running properly and to help with satiety, while also making sure that you're getting enough healthy fats for energy and overall health, and especially for that hormonal balance, because that is so important, especially as we get older and especially for women. And quite frankly, that's often where a lot of people go wrong. They only think about the carbs and they don't think about the balance of all the macronutrients together. So just for a minute before we wrap up, let's also talk about some of the most common mistakes that people tend to make while counting carbs and while tracking their macros so that you can know how to avoid them in your own low carb journey. Now, the first mistake is obviously to just not track, right? Or to keep track in your head. We've already talked a little bit about that, but I'm telling you, that's basically the way to virtually guarantee you are eating a lot more carbs than you realize and also likely not getting nearly enough fat or protein. That said, the second big mistake that I see a lot of people making in our program is to take it to the other extreme, right? To get so wrapped up in trying to count every single thing perfectly that they forget to actually enjoy their food and to enjoy the journey. They start to get a lot of anxiety over knowing exact portion sizes down to the last gram. And here's the deal, guys, like tracking your macros is important. I'm doing a whole episode on it. But it's not a contest and it's not a punishment, and it shouldn't be overly stressful. It's really about learning how to become more mindful and aware of what you're eating so that you can make healthier choices. And it is okay to not be 100% accurate 100% of the time. It is okay to not be 100% accurate 80% of the time. Just do the best you can. Don't stress over it. A third big mistake. Oh, a lot of people make this mistake. And I am totally guilty of this also. But that's to wait until the end of the day to input all of your food after you've already eaten everything, right? Because once you've already eaten everything, it's too late to change it if you realize you blew it or you were totally off track. Maybe you ate something and you thought it was low carb and it turns out, whoa, there were a lot more carbs in there than I thought there was, right? That's a recipe for disaster because you can't undo the clock, right? You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. You can't go back and adjust the food that you've already eaten. And so instead of waiting until the end of the day or until the next day, try to input your food as close to when you're actually eating it as possible, or even consider making a food plan for your day first thing in the morning, right? Wake up, figure out, okay, I'm going to have this for breakfast. I'm going to do this for lunch. And I'm going to do this for dinner, and then kind of see how it tracks out. And that doesn't mean you can't adjust or change things, but at least then you have an idea. Because then if you need to make a few adjustments, you can still do it in real time. And a fourth big mistake that I see people making is focusing too much on your numbers and not on your actual results, right? You get so caught up in trying to hit, I got to hit this certain macro target. I got to, right? Like, I got to hit this thing. And you get so caught up in the target that you forget that the whole point is to actually get results, whatever those may be for you. So are you seeing improvement in your energy levels, in your waistline? Is your sleep better? Is your digestion better? If not, and you're not losing weight, then it might be time to make some adjustments, right? That could be with portion sizes. It could be types of food. It could be your ratio to carbohydrates to fat and protein. You're going to have to start to play around with it because every body is different. So you're going to have to find the right macro balance for you. In the end, it's so important to understand that your health and weight loss journey really is your journey, right? It's yours alone. Everybody is a little different. And that means that what works perfectly for someone else might not work perfectly for you. And what works perfectly for you might not work perfectly for other people. And even what works for a charm for you works like a charm for you in the beginning during phase one probably won't continue working for you later on as your body becomes thin adapted and you're ready to move into phase two. That's why our macro recommendations for phase two of our program are different than phase one, right? That's why we have different recommendations. That's why we do different things. That's why we start talking about all these other aspects. Ultimately, there's no one size fits all approach to counting macros. It really is about experimenting and finding out what works best for you. And of course, the best way to see what actually works is to keep track of it because we will only ever improve what we actually measure. And that's what makes tracking your macros so incredibly powerful for taking charge of your weight loss journey and actually starting to see real results. So guys, don't strive for perfection, but do strive for consistency. Keep at it. Then start to pay attention to how you feel and to what's working and what's not. And remember, you're going to hear me say this so much. I say this all the time. Big goals never happen all at once, but they are only the result of small steps taken consistently over time. So keep it up because my friend, you have got this. And I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode. I will be back very soon. I will be back on Thursday with another super inspiring success story that I promise you do not want to miss. We're going to be talking to Carrie Jordan about her summer of me that inspired her to finally get healthy and take control of her weight loss journey. And speaking of making this the summer of you, remember that it's not too late to join our Healthy Belly Challenge, which is kicking off today. If you have never participated before, you should know that our challenges are so fun. They are so much fun. Such an incredible way to get motivated. It's such a good way to make changes for your health and your well-being that will actually stick. And it really is where we tend to see our customers just start to have these like light bulb moments because it's the perfect low risk way to start to figure out whether or not this lifestyle is even going to work for you, right? Maybe it won't work for you. Maybe it's just impossible for you for whatever reason, but try it for 4 weeks. There's no better time to try it than right now. Because during the challenge, you'll get 4 weeks of meal plans, you'll get daily coaching, emails, videos, access to our private Facebook group. Like, it's so good and it's so fun, and it's kicking off today. And all you have to do to participate is get signed up at thinlicious.com/challenge. Again, that is thinlicious.com/challenge. Guys, in the meantime, it would mean so much to me if you are enjoying this content for this podcast to subscribe or follow the podcast on iTunes or wherever else you like to listen. And if you know anyone else who would find this content useful, then please share it with them, right? Send them a text, share it on social, send them an email, shout out from the rooftops, all the things. And of course, if you have any questions for me, if you have any ideas for things that you want to hear on this podcast, please send me an email at hello@thinlicious.com. I would love to hear from you and hear what you're excited about. If you feel so inclined, leave a review on the podcast. It's awesome. You guys have been doing that. I love it. I love seeing that. And thank you so much for that. Remember, if you do leave a review, take a screenshot and send it to us, because we will be choosing listeners at random every week to win a whole bunch of fabulous prizes. And then I will see you back here very soon for our next episode. That's all for now. See you soon, guys.